establishing for yourself creative habits. They can be writing habits, they can be drawing habits, they can be playing with Post-its habits, they can be playing with cats habits, they can be anything that you want to do. I think what's really important is to think about them as habits and not to think about them as something that has to have an outcome. And not to think about them as something that has to be put in a frame or shown to other people, or something that has to be put on Instagram, something that has to be presented or perfect. Because it is this presentation and this perfection that our society has given us as a standard that is actually one of the biggest problems with creativity as I see it. And I work with students who are studying design, and they have these problems. So if you're not studying design and you're having issues with creativity or think you're not creative, or if you're not a design professor or a design professional and you're saying, I'm not creative, you are not alone. There's plenty of people in design professions and in the arts professions who are worrying about how creative they are. So I have 4 sort of ways that I might talk to you about how to move into these creative habits. And that's actually what I prepped for today, because I felt like that might be the most helpful thing in this somewhat stressful moment of our lives. And I'm kind of getting tired of saying in this somewhat stressful moment, let's just say it, in this crazy time. Well, I'm getting tired of saying that too, but in this whatever we're in. So I would say number 1 is awareness. And I think this is a scholarly crew. And so most of you are aware of awareness, and most of you know what is meant by the idea of being aware of how you think, right? This is a really messy diagram, but the idea here is divergent and convergent thought. In cycles, right? This is called the double diamond. And us designers, we look at the double diamond often. And we actually have a group called the UK Design Council who put out the double diamond for us in 2008 or 2007. And they just put out a revised one in 2018. And the double diamond is 2 diamonds, 2 cycles of divergent thought, which is thinking without criticality, gathering, brainstorming, or popcorning out ideas quickly. Okay, so is it a cat meowing? Is it a door squeaking? Is it what are all these things making this noise, right? And then a cycle of convergent thought, right, which is synthesis. So it's looking at the clues, looking at all the stuff you've gathered, seeing how, what are the patterns, what are the things I can eliminate, what are the things that are successful. But then what's really important to me in terms of this cycle is that it has actually what we call a pivot point, or I like to call it the reframe. I didn't make that up, and I didn't make this up. This is the UK Design Council, and it's also based on other research that's happened in other disciplines. School of Ed people look at the double diamond, social science people look at the double diamond. So I didn't invent it, designers didn't invent it, maybe neuroscientists invented it, but it's something that's across many disciplines. People look at it. The reframe is really important. And as a creative person, the reframe for me is actually the place where we do reflection. And I'm a big fan of Donald Schoen. And sort of the idea that reflective thought and reflective writing is a huge part of my creative process. And it feeds into another tactic that I'm going to talk about in a second. So if you do successive cycles of divergent and convergent thought, you're being creative. But there's 2 tricks here actually. Trick number 1 is suspending the criticality in the divergent part. This is really, really hard for us. Really hard. Really hard. Did I mention it's hard? because we're trained to be really critical. Like, we have a critical eye. Everybody in the society is critical. We are very good at that. And that's not a bad thing. We have to be. We are bombarded with information. How do we make sense of anything? Like, how do we even know when our mortgage payment is due? Critical thought, right? How do we even know that this email isn't going to like take our ID, right? Critical thought. So it's a survival technique, but we have to be able to suspend it to be creative, right? And then we have to be able to apply it. So again, this meta sort of like understanding of our creative process is really important. The more you can build this awareness, and I know I'm kind of talking about stuff that a lot of people in this audience already know about and are experts in. Like, it's a little bit funny to me to be talking about this process in front of people who teach this. I know you do. And so this is a mix of people in this audience. It's students and professors, scholars in creativity, and students who are thinking about taking courses in creativity. So I apologize if I am at all telling you stuff that you teach. And if I tell it to you in a way that's different than how you teach it, so much the better. I'd love to hear how you teach it. I love talking about it. I've done research, I've written about this, but I like to present it in a really simple way, hence the scribble scrabble. So open to conversations about that. The number 2 concept here for me is what I call capture harvest. And this is something that I teach my students, and more scribbling. So this is all about everyday scribbles. Do something every day. Capture it. Do something every day. So there's a book by a woman named Julia Cameron called The Artist's Way. Maybe some of you have read it. It's not my favorite book, but she has this thing called, it's a great book, but it's just not, she has a thing called the morning pages. She ascribes to writing 3 pages every morning. I can never do that. I'm not that disciplined. But the idea is that you make or do something every day, and then you maybe stick it in a drawer. I used to call it punishing my work. I would just stick it somewhere and ignore it for like months. But then when I needed it, it was there. This is an intensive process. This has become a much more intensive process for me in my work, where I just capture. Then when I'm writing a paper, when I'm working on a creative project, when I'm doing an installation, when I'm making a piece of art, when I'm designing something, I harvest. I think about, well, what have I been working on that I can pull into this, right? This stops me from hitting any roadblocks. When I write a paper, the first thing I do is I harvest from these like little notes I make to myself all day long. And 9 times out of 10, if I do that, I have almost half a paper written before I've even done any work on a paper. So one of the things I try to do is to teach my students to do this, because what this does is it helps you get over that natural inclination that many of us have to think it has to be perfect